one and all. And well, sure, it feels like we've had an 11-month Lenten experience. But a good evening and a happy snow-laden Mardi Gras to you in any case from here in Chicago. Welcome to the second in our series, Catholic Higher Education in Light of Catholic Social Thought, a set of 4 conversations we are hosting based on an edited volume of essays by Bernard G. Prusak and Jennifer Reed Booley. This collection is called Catholic Higher Education in Light of Catholic Social Thought, Critical Constructive Essays, and forthcoming from Paulus Press later in 2021. The talks we are hosting are 4 parts of a 13-part series taking place in Zoom spaces across the country this spring, and please see our web pages for details. My name is Michael Murphy, and I direct the Hank Center here at Loyola, Chicago. And on behalf of university leadership and on behalf of the Hank family, whose generous gift supports our wide programming and initiatives, I extend a hearty greeting. A kind welcome too, I hasten to add, from our dedicated center staff, Megan Toomey, who's our center manager, and our graduate student assistant, Kathleen McNutt. And Megan and Kathleen are most instrumental in getting our events, as I always say, from farm to table, and I remain grateful for their work. Tonight's event is called What Students, Which Mission? And I can't help but hear echoes of Alistair McIntyre in the construction of this compelling title. And so, here we are. Colleges closing, tuition rising, graduation rates lagging. What is the way forward, particularly for Catholic colleges and universities who usually navigate such questions by turning to their distinct missions as both an anchor and a compass for the way forward? Tonight, we will speak on such matters, and we welcome our distinguished speakers, Dr. Laura Nichols, Professor of Sociology at Santa Clara University, and Dr. Jennifer Boyle, Clinical Professor, Associate Dean for Academic Affairs, and Director of Operations at Arrupe College here at Loyola University, Chicago. Dr. Nichols will begin our foray into the issues by presenting institutional data and reflection on Catholic colleges and universities in the US. Laura will take us on an excursion by examining student demographics, institutional practices, and how larger structural factors influence how Catholic colleges and universities operate in the US today, ways that are often, she finds, in direct opposition to the tenets of Catholic social teaching, Catholic social thought. Dr. Boyle has read and reflected on Dr. Nichols' points and will provide a response based on her scholarship and her leadership, mainly in Arrupe College, but really other places as well. We all will then together spend the rest of our time thinking together about the ways Catholic college networks might come together to work towards a better embodiment of mission through the students that we enroll, students that we educate, students who are in our care. So just some housekeeping before we begin. First, to put your eyes on our next event, which is next week, next Tuesday, February 23rd. It's a publication lecture with Deborah E. Cantor, Dr. Cantor from Albion College, and her book, Chicago Católico, Making Catholic Parishes Mexican. Deborah will be in conversation with our colleague, Dr. Ruth Gomberg Munoz, and this event is co-sponsored by our Department of History here at Loyola. This will be great, and so please join us. One note on our Zoom format before I introduce our esteemed guests. So today's Zoomcast, those who have been on our Zoomcast know the drill. It's a meeting. This means that while the chat is limited, we're going to use it. So we use chat for the questions, for the comments, and so on. So please direct your questions, your comments to me, Michael Murphy, and I will integrate them as best I can into the conversation that will follow. So I encourage you, as I always do, to listen actively and to ask or comment as our speakers present, so we can be ready to go. And this is a way of also listening actively and writing things down and really imprinting. So if you think about it, write it down, and please submit. And thank you for doing so. So with that, let's welcome our speakers formally. And Laura Nichols is an applied sociologist at Santa Clara University in California, where she teaches community-based courses in education and participatory, research. She co-edited with Terry Ann Jones, Undocumented and in College, Students and Institutions in a Climate of National Hostility, a project coordinated by Fairfield University, partnering with Santa Clara and Loyola. This book was out of Fordham, 2017. Laura's latest book, The Journey Before Us, First Generation Pathways from Middle School to College, researches the experiences of alumni from a nativity middle school and their pathways through Catholic and public high schools, as well as different types of post-secondary experiences. This book is from Rutgers and was published just last year. Welcome, Laura. Let me also introduce our respondent now, because Laura will speak and then Jenny will respond right in stride. So this is Jennifer R. Wozniak Boyle, clinical professor, associate dean for academic affairs, and director of operations at Arrupe College of Loyola University, Chicago. At Arrupe College, Dr. Boyle oversees faculty, curriculum, advising, and academic support programming, and assists the dean with strategic management and operations. Prior to assuming her role at Arrupe College, Dr. Boyle served as associate professor and chair of the political science department at Elmhurst College for about 10 years, 2006 to 15. And she was president of the Illinois Political Science Association from 2005 to 7. Dr. Boyle has published on the European debt crisis, European Union, and European regional development policy, among other things. Since coming to Arrupe College, Dr. Boyle's research interests have grown to include higher education administration. Her most recent piece, Cura Personalis as Institutional Practice, co-authored with Jay Badinsky, was published in Jesuit Higher Education, the journal, as you know, last year. And so now, without further ado, welcome to What Students, Which Mission, and welcome Dr. Laura Nichols. The Zoom podium is yours.
Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you to Megan. Thank you to everyone at the Hank Center. I'm really been looking forward to this conversation, which I'm sure is near and dear to the hearts of all of us here. I'm also very excited to get to be in conversation with Dr. Jenny Boyle. I've long known about Arrupe College, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we will be having. And I'm grateful to Bernard Prusak and Jennifer Reed-Booley, who involved me in this larger project. The topic related to mission and the students that we enroll is obviously a very big one. We know that higher education in general is facing many strains and upheavals, and each of our Catholic colleges and universities in the US is unique, with our own founding stories, histories, local context, and embodiment of mission. So I thought I'd use this time to raise a few points in the following 3 areas. And as I said, I really am looking forward to the discussion afterwards. We should have plenty of time for that. So first, I'll just briefly go over the history of Catholic education and put it in the context of the development of formalized education in the United States, as well as what has been termed the Catholic advantage. I'm a sociologist, so I really don't have much to say if I don't have some data to speak from. So we will look together at some demographic information from IPEDS data from some of our institutions. And then I'll propose some tentative ideas, at least for discussion and potential ways forward. So we know that the earliest Catholic schools in the United States really made an imprint on the development of public schools and the federalization of schooling. The main purpose of these schools was to allow means for Catholics to maintain and support their faith in the context of the increasing formalization of public schooling, which was dominated by Protestant influences and teachings. And Catholic schools really spread rapidly, and in some cases were the first schools in areas. I thought maybe we could do a quick poll just to see about how many of you actually attended a K-12 or not Catholic school. And the second question is asking about Catholic college. So Megan nicely put together a poll here so we could just kind of see where we are as a group. Oh, wow. Okay. So right now it's in the 70% of you attended a Catholic K-12 school, and even more, I guess shouldn't be surprising, 81% it looks like a Catholic college. So there's also, I have a link on the live stream, and I have that question there too if any of you are watching that way or watching later. Thank you, Megan. So at the height of Catholic education in the United States, more than half of Catholics attended a Catholic school at some point in their K-12 education. So obviously much more in our audience. Of course, what helped was that many were free or low cost thanks to the availability of teachers from religious orders. Similarly, the founding missions of our Catholic colleges range from the earliest schools created to provide training for religious, as well as to provide an opportunity structure for Catholic education and address discrimination against Catholics. So I especially like this part in the yellow box of this Boston periodical that states, opposed to nunneries and the Jesuits. Imagine what would happen if that would have taken hold. So the prevalence of Catholic schools succeeded in providing avenues of social mobility for millions of first and second generation Catholic immigrant families, mainly from Ireland, Italy, and Eastern Europe. And Catholic schools really have dominated the private school market in the United States, especially our elementary schools. They've made private education accessible to children in low and middle income families. But while in 1950s there were over 13,000 Catholic schools, according to the National Catholic Educational Association, today there are just over 6,000 Catholic K-12 schools. And as Catholic elementary schools have closed, students from middle class families have had less access to private schooling overall. So the proportion of those in upper incomes has stayed relatively consistent over time in accessing private schools. Same with those from lower income families, very small percentage, but still consistent. However, if we look at the proportion of those from middle income families over time, and since the closing of so many of our Catholic elementary schools, we see that middle class families have much less access to private schooling. The influence of Catholic K-12 schools on the larger society and for the European immigrants to the United States in the 1800s and 1900s was not a minor one. Economists, sociologists, and educational researchers have noted the Catholic advantage that fueled the social mobility of Catholics into the middle and upper classes and grew wealth for future generations. In particular, economic sociologist Lisa Keister documents that as a group, Catholics in the US experienced more rapid social class advancement than did those in other religions during the same time period. In one analysis, she studied Catholic young adults in the 1980s and 1990s and found that while they started at a more disadvantaged place in terms of the education levels of their parents and family income, they achieved greater mobility than those in other groups, leading to wealth accumulation. She notes that access to quality, affordable Catholic schools is likely one of the factors that explains this rapid wealth mobility of Catholics in the United States. However, today's first and second generation immigrant children whose parents identify as Catholic do not have as great access today to private Catholic schools. As noted earlier, there are fewer Catholic K-12 schools than in the past, even though the number of Catholics in the US has grown. Most Catholic children attend urban public schools. Today, a large proportion of Catholics identify as Latinx, and 60% of Catholics under age 18 are Latinx, with 90% born in the US. I'm grateful for the work of Drs. Ospino and Wetzel O'Neill and others on this topic. They note that there are over 8 million Catholic school-age children who are Latinx, however, less than 5% attend a Catholic K-12 school. And it sounds like you have an upcoming talk. And also I want you to alert you to this talk by Dr. Michelle Gonzalez Maldonado, who will be looking at this topic. And the title of her talk is Inside Out, the Latinx Future of Catholic Higher Education. It's sponsored by the Lane Center at the University of San Francisco. So Catholics of today include a diverse mix of new and second generation immigrants, as well as those whose ancestors immigrated long ago and have benefited from the intergenerational transfer of the Catholic advantage. The latter of these are likely our very generous alumni and board members. So now, given that context, let's take a closer look at our colleges and the students in our colleges. And some of the patterns that we'll examine also apply to our secondary Catholic high schools, though there is not as much publicly available data as for colleges. And one point I raise about mission and students is to wonder if some of our hand-wringing about the loss of Catholic identity in our colleges is about the students we are enrolling. And while our colleges have always enrolled Catholics and non-Catholics, we could do more to serve students who are looking to college as a means of achieving dignity in work and the call to community and participation articulated in Catholic social thought. We know that Catholic colleges provided opportunities for millions of Catholics who were first in their families to attend college, and this has advantaged subsequent generations of Catholics in the United States. And in the United States today, we still have very large numbers of prospective students who would be first in their families to attend college. Just over half of all children and youth in the United States, our future college students, have parents without a college degree. However, first-generation college students, especially those who are born into families with low incomes, are driving what has been termed the college completion crisis. First-generation students are enrolling in college, usually two-year schools at high rates, but don't transfer or earn any type of degree or certification. But in previous research, I have found that Catholic colleges as a group are more successful than other private colleges and public four-year colleges in graduating first-generation college students, as well as students who identify as Latinx. This is very hopeful news. These are our future college students, and we have proven success educating and graduating them. So then how are we doing in enrolling students who would be the first in their families to go to college, as well as students who are born into families with limited economic resources? To look at this, I pulled IPED's data for all of our four-year degree granting Catholic colleges and universities. And IPEDS, those of you who work in institutional research or know about it, is required for any schools and programs that participate in or are applicants for participation in any federal student financial aid program. So these data are publicly available, and I know many of you working at colleges use these data for your planning purposes. So for tonight and for presentation purposes, I chose two groups of our colleges to examine. The first is the result if you Google the top Catholic colleges in the US, and you get this US News list of 10 nationally ranked four-year Catholic colleges. So for these colleges, I extracted data on the proportion of undergraduate students that are first-generation college, receive federal Pell Grants, and the median family income. So these percentages here are for all undergraduate students. And then I also pulled data on the percent of an entering class that were transfer students. So as you'll see, these colleges have small proportions of their undergraduate students that are first in their families to attend college, ranging from 10% of the undergraduate student body to 25% at the University of San Diego. Looking at these data, we see that these colleges are reproducing the inequality that has become so extreme in the United States today. So for example, why 34% of college students in the US receive a Pell Grant, an indicator of economic need, our top ranked schools have much lower proportions of students who receive such grants. These schools also have very low rates of enrolling transfer students, which is problematic given that most first-generation college students start at two-year schools. Now, it's one thing, of course, to examine the colleges whose existence on a top 10 list are driven by metrics that privilege this type of selectivity. And yet they can also be places to consider mission and to ask if we're comfortable with these demographics. Another way to look at this is to look at Catholic colleges that have recently closed or stopped offering degrees to undergraduate students. The Association of Catholic Colleges and Universities is attempting to track the closure of Catholic colleges. According to their records, 28 Catholic colleges have closed since 2000. This shows a partial list of the most recent. It's a dynamic list, So for example, I learned last week that Notre Dame de Namur recently announced that they're not closing, but focusing on graduate education rather than undergraduates. So feel free to email me if there's any errors, and I'll pass on the information. But if we look at these schools, we see that the percentage of undergraduate students who are first in their families and or receive Pell Grants are much larger than the 10 profiled in the previous slide. At some schools, students that received a Pell Grant are more than half of the undergraduate population. And for the most part, the median income of families was much lower. What will happen to the students who previously would have gone to our now closed colleges? Will there be more support for our already strapped public community colleges and four-year schools, or is there a different way forward? Now, I realize that I have the privilege of being a faculty member who can analyze without having to do the difficult day-to-day work of keeping our colleges viable and available. At the same time, I think our schools are worth fighting for and fighting to not lose anymore. So I'd like to tentatively offer some ideas for consideration and ways forward, starting with our strengths. First, our Catholic schools are still here. When other religious colleges have lost their affiliations, our schools have still maintained their identities as Catholic schools. We still have many schools from a variety of religious orders that are educating students. Even while we may be arguing, examining, and worrying about if we're Catholic enough, we are here to have the discussions, and we have robust places like the Hank Center in which to have these conversations, as well as so many who have given their professional lives to Catholic education. Second, we really do have something that is needed in the US higher education market at this moment. We have potential students, and we know how to serve them. We have proven success in enrolling and providing a quality education, and we make sure that students graduate. We know how to do this for students who are first in their families to attend college, as well as students who are first or second generation immigrants to the US. And this is really true at all levels of Catholic education, not just colleges. Networks of schools such as Nativity Middle Schools and Cristo Rey High Schools, among many others, are engines for mobility and opportunity for students. Third, we have an intellectual tradition that can help us understand this moment, especially this economic moment. Catholic social teaching requires that we expose the larger systems and structures that can pit our schools against each other and cause us to create admissions, financial aid, and other policies that go against our ideals to stay in the education game. CST helps to point us towards a way of proceeding that puts the dignity of people over profits and prioritizes the common good. Although there are many critiques of Pope Francis's encyclical Fratelli Tutti, this and other church documents provide a way for us to understand and critique our current economic system and how it has led to the devastation of our planet and so many lives. Without these larger global and moral directives and ideals, would we even have a way to talk about the dangers of unbridled capitalism that has so influenced why our educational institutions are stratified the way they are today? At the same time, the fixes to our Catholic colleges cannot be acts of charity or the creation of a few more scholarships that are expensive to endow in our current models. And we can't devolve to putting the fix on one person, one president, our boards, or any one college even to lead the way. So I cautiously offered these ideas as a way of proceeding for our discussion. We must first reckon with the history of each of our institutions, including how slavery, colonization, our early role in sponsoring boarding schools for Indigenous children, and the domination and destruction that occurred along with the acquisition of the land where our schools sit and where earliest Catholics settled. Part of this reckoning can really include an honest analysis of if our institutions have shored up and created protected places for students for mainly white and wealthy families and left out hardworking students without the wealth and legacy to enroll at our schools. This will require understanding the students who are missing from our schools, not just those that applied and go somewhere else, but students who live in our communities, especially aspiring first-generation college students graduating from local high schools, and as well, maybe their parents. We also need to change our ways of proceeding. As long as we keep only our individual college in focus, changing the status quo will likely be impossible, and doing so might even lead to more colleges closing. If we put students at the center, especially students locked out of higher education, Maybe we can find new ways to come together and change the trajectory of our current course. Without larger macro changes, we will continue to feel like we are constantly swimming upstream, trying to live at ideals with no structural supports. Some colleges are coming together based on geographic proximity, and given the complexity in state laws, this might be a way to go, especially for our schools in areas without other Catholic colleges. Could we use our national networks to come together with more power and purpose? Can we leverage these networks more to create federal and state policies that allow for easier partnerships and increased resources for transfer students who might want to enroll at our four-year schools? We do have an opportunity for more of our Catholic colleges to return to our earlier successes of providing options for first and second generation immigrant students, and as a result, contribute more to community and individual well-being over the reproduction of advantage. This could be more at the heart of all of our missions. To do so, though, will take courage, grace, and larger structural changes so our colleges do not have to pursue prestige, rankings, and wealth for survival, and can instead look to new ways for more of our schools to serve the common good. This will require that we interrogate current practices within our individual schools, have the support of entities beyond our individual colleges, and change the way higher education is operating in the United States today. Thank you, and I look forward to Dr. Jenny Boyle's comments.
Thank you, Laura, so much for your attention to this very critical problem. And you demonstrate it so compellingly. And I think really what is so important were your impressive were your conclusions in terms of a way forward in addressing access for first gen students of color and low income students to Jesuit higher education, to Catholic higher education in general. I think those are really important points. Interrogating our current practices in higher ed is really, really central. I would, I think what I can add perhaps is an overview of how Arrupe College is attempting to be an avenue, is attempting to be a sort of restructuring within higher ed. And I think I can share my slides with you if I can. Let me see if I can do this. Let's see, there we go. Okay. So before I start, I do want to mention that I have, I've worked at Arrupe College since 2015, and I've had the privilege to work under two Jesuit deans, one of whom is here tonight. Our new dean, Father Tom Knightsky, is actually in attendance here. So I'm not introducing him to shirk my responsibilities for this presentation, only to let everybody know that he's available for questions too, perhaps at the end, and that we're all really delighted to have his leadership at Arrupe College. So what you see here is our mission statement. We were founded in 2015 as a two-year college within Loyola University. So this is unique. We think we might be one of two colleges like this at the moment. The other that we know of is St. Thomas's Doherty Family College. And this provides us the access to all of the Loyola University Chicago resources and support structures. It's also it's it's an innovative approach to higher ed in the sense that it's the first, I believe, Jesuit two-year school in the United States. So what the students that we serve, you can see when Laura was referring to Pell eligible students, I'm sure you all know, but what it means to be Pell eligible is essentially you're coming from a family of 4 with an income of $40,000 or less. So that is really a measure of, you know, sort of it's an indication of a low socioeconomic status and poverty if you're eligible for a Pell Grant, particularly if you have something that's called a 0 EFC or expected family contribution. So at Arrupe College, 86% of our students are eligible for Pell Grants, and probably 60% of them have 0 EFCs. So they're among the most needy of students. 96% of our students are students of color. And in terms of the distribution, about 70% are Latinx students, and about 20% are African American students, and then 10% identify as Asian or white or other. You can see the female male distribution is pretty equal to certainly Loyola University and other Catholic universities or colleges. Our ACT score, average ACT score, we don't require the ACT, which is a pretty important for access to higher ed, to be test optional. But our ACT score is self-reported by the students. The average is around 17. High school GPA around 3.0, and the Chicagoland commuters, 100% of our students are commuting. So I think when we look at why do larger four-year universities in general not well serve low-income students of color, first-generation students, there are a set of barriers that that first-generation college students of color, and low-income students face. And I want to talk a little bit about those barriers, and then how Arrupe College has adopted institutional practices to meet those barriers or to overcome those barriers. And I would argue that those are generalizable to four-year institutions to certain degrees. So the first barrier obviously is the cost, right? Many of the universities that were on that, the list that Laura showed us, cost $50,000 or more to attend a year in terms of the cost of attendance. And that's not affordable for many students. It's not affordable after full federal and full state aid and even merit aid. Okay, so I don't know how close you are to the admissions processes or to financial aid processes, but full federal aid, you know, adds up to about, you know, it could be about $10,000 a year. State aid in Illinois is around $5,000 a year. So you're getting to $15,000 a year in your federal and your state aid. And, you know, that it's impossible for students to make up the difference when they see a price tag of having to borrow $25,000 a year. They're not willing to do it, and their families aren't willing to do it. So a major barrier to access to higher education in the United States is the cost and the gap between the cost of education and what aid is.
Jennifer?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's Megan. Your slides aren't advancing, and I think the audience would love to see the whole presentation.
Megan, you're so sweet for telling me. Are we on the right slide now?
No.
I'm not actually able to see the, for some reason, I got cut off from the Zoom. So the Zoom has disappeared on my screen, so I can't see what you're seeing.
So we are seeing your PowerPoint, but it is not in presentation mode. It is in editing mode. Are you using 2 screens? There you go.
Whoop.
Okay, so we're looking at key elements of a Arrupe College model screen.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. I'm not sure exactly. I'm going to stop my share.
Okay.
And thank you for interrupting me. Let's try this again.
Are you using two screens?
I
Jennifer?
am. Is that the
So-
problem?
Well, no, but PowerPoint will project differently on two screens in conjunction with Zoom. So it's confusing if you haven't used it before.
Okay. Let's see then. Let me try one more time to close out absolutely everything else on the screen. How about that? That should work, right? And I can also just stop talking. I can talk without the slides as well. So we don't have to waste too much more time. Strange.
I view it as kind of a tutorial for the Zoom watcher, just to see behind the screen, behind the
Are you
scenes.
seeing it now by any chance?
So
Are you seeing 5 little circles?
we're seeing it in edit mode instead of presentation mode.
Okay. How about now?
We're seeing your presentation mode as the presenter. But I think if the slides will advance from here, this is a great place to go ahead from.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well done,
Well
Megan,
done.
and well done, Jenny.
You might have spoken too soon, Michael. I don't know what's going on here. So I'm gonna stop. This is the slide that indicates the barriers. Okay, so I think this is what you're seeing. The financial barriers are a big one. Other barriers include college readiness. And you saw that we had a 17 ACT. That's indicative of students coming from underserved, underfunded schools and having lower preparation for college work. They would maybe be lacking as particularly in writing and math preparation. In addition, to that, they have family support, sort of barriers in the sense that if a parent hasn't gone to college, they might not be able to help that student apply to college, determine financial aid, or navigate college once they're there. And then a final barrier is belonging. And so because they're students of color, first generation, low income students are underrepresented in higher ed. They don't see themselves. They may have trouble fitting in, trouble finding community, trouble finding support, and this can mitigate against retention of the students, and also against their, it can hinder their development of academic self-esteem and feeling like they are a student that belongs in higher ed. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually stop the share, if that's okay, and just talk. I think the really important things to know, and this is sort of how Arrupe was designed to fit those barriers, or to compensate for those barriers. So affordability, the big one, is we achieved at Arrupe by setting tuition at $13,000. So tuition at Arrupe colleges, it matches what a student who had a 0 EFC would earn in terms of MAP and Pell, what they would get. So affordability is really critical. And this is probably not something that all Jesuit colleges and universities at the 4-year level can do. So but it is something that, because we're part of Loyola University and we have a very streamlined model in terms of sort of how many faculty we have and how many staff we have, and we rely on the large university for so many supports, we can maintain that financial model. So $13,000, the average student pays around $1,700 a year. So I think that's really, really important to know. about Arrupe and about higher ed serving, how well it's serving students or not. A second thing that we've done at Arrupe College is we have a really narrow path to degrees. So students have the possibility of a couple of different associate's degrees, but they're doing mainly a gen ed curriculum with some minor electives, and it's very streamlined, very structured. There aren't a lot of opportunities for a student to stray from a 2-year timeline to completion. All of those courses are transferable, and so Laura, when you were talking about networks and creating, sort of, what I heard was like articulation agreements between 2-year colleges and 4-year colleges. Those are really important for first gen students. Those articulation agreements are what allow students to take all of their coursework from that 2-year college to the 4-year university and graduate in another 2 years, graduate in a timely fashion so that they're not racking up debt. And those are things that don't exist. They exist in Illinois and some other states, but they don't exist across the country. And those are really helpful to first gen students. I think another thing that we've had the luxury of at Arrupe College is because we were starting from scratch and because we were a general education curriculum, we can hire exclusively for mission. We can hire, when we're looking for an English professor, we can hire an English professor that loves to teach, has experience working maybe in Jesuit education, has experience working with first gen students, is a person of color. We can prioritize those things rather than having to look for somebody who's a specialist in 19th century literature. So that is, I think, it's really, really critical to find, to have faculty and staff that want to accompany students and who get the mission of putting the student at the center of what we do. And we've been able to prioritize that in our hiring, and we've been really lucky in the sense, and I think it's the mission that attracts the people. It's really, really important. Another thing, 2 other things that are really unique. We have a really robust system of academic supports that, sort of make up, that try to foster belonging among students and maybe compensate for some of the lack of knowledge that a student might come to, us with, the lack of knowledge about college or higher ed in general. So I could talk about those if anybody's interested. The really, really important feature, though, are the wraparound supports. And these are, we call it the Arrupe hug, essentially. So we have the academic side of the house, but then we have a very rich student success and development set of programs and policies. And, sort of just to mention a few, we have embedded social workers within Arrupe College who do sort of counseling and casework support for students. We have an Arrupe market, which is a food pantry where students can come and get food. We have a meal program where students get full 2 meals when we're on campus. Now we're trying to do as many box lunches as students want to pick up. And but that's a really critical part of serving students and helping them feel like they're not, sort of, if they can come and get food for their family, they're not making that trade-off between pursuing their own, sort of betterment versus, sort of their families, which is a critical sort of, I think, struggle for students that we serve, is that they feel sometimes like they're choosing between their own, sort of success and the students. Finally, we have retreats and intensive orientations. I could go on. I love Arrupe College, and I'm really super proud of our students. And the last thing I would end with is that we have been successful. So if you look at 2-year colleges and you look at retention and graduation rates, a national first-year retention rate would be 50% for a 2-year college. We're at 72% first-year retention. So we're retaining our students. That's working, and we're graduating them in much larger proportions. So a 2-year graduation rate, which isn't really even measured, It's associate's degrees are usually measured in 3 years, but if you look at IPED's data, the 2-year rate for urban community colleges is 12%. We're hitting 42% in 2-year graduation rates. And our students are transferring. They're transferring to Loyola University. They're transferring, to other Jesuit colleges and universities as well. And they're also transferring within the state of Illinois. So we're really pleased. We think it's working. And if I already mentioned one dean, I could mention our first dean, Steve Katsouras, who's, I don't think here, but who has a book. This is a plug for Steve, and better than my PowerPoints, I can send you the link to the book. The Come to Believe network is a network that is gearing up to help start these Arrupe type models at other colleges and universities. So thank you guys so much. I'm really sorry for the PowerPoint snafu there.
No problem at all. It was an expert recovery. It's all about recovery, I think. So to keep on pushing forward. Hey, that's wonderful. Great conversation. Thanks to you both. We have a lot of questions and got about 25 minutes. So I can say, just as a professor at Loyola, how wonderful it is. I've had many Arrupe College students come into my classroom, and they are excellent. They do so well, and it just fires the soul. So I think it is working. And I love the Arrupe hug. I think we all can think about the Arrupe hug. And I think about Father Pedro Arrupe, who would love this. Just a wonderfully passionate, giving man, 27 years in Japan doing work and not always having a lot of feedback of like, hey, rah team, really out there on the margins. So wonderful stuff. Here's a question from Claire. This is Dr. Claire. Dr. Claire Noonan, our colleague from Dominican, who asks, can you speak to the growing number of Catholic HSIs and their future? I don't think Clara means Holy Spirit Interactive, the evangelical Catholic group. It's possible, but I think she's talking about Hispanic serving institutions. Maybe Laura, either one. I think, but Laura, maybe you begin. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think a number of our schools, I don't know the exact number, are categorized as HSIs, and we need them badly because obviously the demographics and the demand is there, and so it's just making sure that we can support those institutions, particularly as Jenny presented. If students have low income, then they'll need a lot of support. So that's the big question. I think that's the thing that, of course, all of our schools have struggled with staying afloat financially, and particularly if a high proportion of the student body at the school is low income. The Pell, grants have not kept up with inflation by any means. And a Pell Grant used to be able to cover the cost, of a public education, including living expenses. And those days are long gone. And so then when you look at that in relation to the tuitions at our schools. So, there's hope that the Pell Grant, maybe there'll be more funding, Pell Grant funding. And of course, different states are also doing different things. But, I do think, and I'm curious what people think about this idea of growing our networks a little bit more, because some of our schools just might need a little bit more boost of the network than others, or there are ways that we can, come together. And I know that some of our Catholic colleges have partnered with other schools, not necessarily even other Catholic schools. Some have bought other small colleges that were struggling. So, this does seem to be a time of innovation. The Arrupe model is putting together lots of different ideas and needs. So yeah, my thoughts on that are kind of general, but just I think we do need to do what we can to make sure that we're serving those students, because we know demographically those are our future college students.
Yeah, Jenny, I wonder if you, because with the Pell situation and that the variability there and the whimsicality between administrations, which is terrible, to have those massive vicissitudes, the spectrum. But that Jenny, so we have 13,000 at Arrupe College, but we have a really streamlined infrastructure at Loyola where we can live well and underwrite. Christine Farr asks as much on our chat, well, just to me actually, But there is some advantage, right, Jenny, from the infrastructure of Loyola. Do you want to say anything about that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, I think, I'm sitting in McGuire Hall. So, I mean, we didn't create a building from scratch. This was a building that we got from Loyola University. That just campus safety, the libraries, facilities, and then all of the resources. I mean, in this move to online learning, we've benefited tremendously from the Office of Online Instruction in terms of faculty development and learning. So I mean, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So it really is, sort of it's a tremendous way to start a new college.
Yeah, you said it. Okay, let me move on here to kind of a pair of concerns I think that work well together. So I'll read them both. And the first one's from Brian Sokol, and he writes this: "It strikes me that the top 10 Catholic universities have diluted their Catholic identities, at least in marketing, compared to the smaller Catholic colleges that have closed or are at risk of closing. To what extent is a salient Catholic identity not an advantage for surviving in the higher education marketplace?" That's part one. So please jot maybe a thought about that. Part two, a little different. Vincent Donnelly asks, do we retain a Catholic higher education system when increasingly our students and faculty are not Catholic? So you can see there's some terrain there that's somewhat related, but then a little bit oblique. Any thoughts there, Laura or Jenny?
Well, I'll just start with the second one first. I mean, we do have a lot of Catholic youth who would really love to be at our Catholic colleges. So I think we can think about that the reverse way, and just think about, what we need to do to make sure, like in the past, that we have had places. Now, obviously, the cost is big for a first generation immigrant student whose family has limited economic means, and there aren't many federal or state supports. So, so that's my first response to the question. I don't know, Jenny, if you want to hop on that or move to the second one.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but I think, I guess, I think we become more fully Catholic the more that we serve first generation students of color, low income students, the more that we invite students that are not traditionally within higher ed, whether they're Catholic or not, the more that we invite them into higher ed, the more we're fulfilling our mission. So I guess to that, I guess that's, I don't know if
I don't know either, because I don't, because it could be a branding thing. There's that whole other question here about, we have massive disaffiliation happening with Generation Y and Generation Z, mostly white folks. But, and then Laura was mentioning that a lot of Catholics who are blocked out want to be there, right? Maybe one group is disaffiliating, the other one who are affiliated aren't able to be there. So that's a strange problem to have. But, so it might, and because of the sex abuse crisis and cover up, that's an elephant in the room. That could be disaffiliation, but even there's other reasons why that is, but that maybe the branding's not working for a certain crowd. That might be something. I don't know. You want to respond to that before I ask another question? That could be just a text without comment, and that's fine. This is from Felipe. Felipe, a friend of mine, Legaretta, who's a colleague at Loyola as well. And Felipe asked this: what are the three most important factors that are driving tuition up at Catholic universities, but specifically Jesuit universities in the USA? Any thoughts on that?
Well, certainly salaries and benefits. I think for most campuses, that's the number one, the biggest proportion of the budget. And so that's why, the for-profit colleges have done whatever they can to try and cut those kinds of costs. And that's why we've seen the movement to more hiring of adjunct faculty. And I think there's actually a talk in a couple of weeks associated with this project about labor politics and policies. So I think that will also be interesting to to think about, what are the solutions, if there are any in this, in this context that we have right now. It's a really tough one.
Jenny, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but my
Yeah.
understanding is that when you look at the growth of expenses, it is salaries and benefits, and it's also student services too. If you look over, sort of the last 40 or 50 years, if you're looking at growth in terms of I wouldn't argue that those necessarily should be cut, as sort of as a, but I think that in terms of residence halls and capital expenses and things like that, attracting, colleges have gotten into sort of an arms race in some ways of providing really attractive amenities to students, and that can be expensive. So I mean, I think that's at least part of the picture too.
Yeah, I do remember that. I went to USF. I remember that move in the 90s when that health center that was better than any health center you'd ever seen before. And that was a move to attract more students. I do see on the call my dear friend, Sister Jean, the Sister of Charity of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And I think about the sisters who pioneered and established this amazing school system in the US. I think it was the Ursulines who might have been first. Is that right? I think 1723 or something. And then the BVMs came around in mid 19th century. So many of came around, but they were inexpensive. Let me put this the right way. The labor dynamics were much different then for Catholic schools, especially into the Golden Age, than they are now. Father Rick Malloy, Jesuit, asked a similar question. Are there any thoughts about creatively scaling faculty and staff salaries to students' families' ability to pay? So now we're into some creative economics here. I think, Lori, maybe you probably have worked on this.
I actually have not.
Okay, sorry.
I think we need to get our crack minds and our business schools working on this, because we need to provide living wages too to people who are working at our universities. Particularly, we have many universities in urban areas, of course, that sometimes have very high costs of living. So there are many pushes and pulls, and I think that's one reason why I'm wondering about. We've been working as individual colleges for so long, but are there ways for us to come together in new ways that we haven't thought of before, to partner with different things, maybe to share some expenses on some areas? And, this might require that we're coming together within state lines if labor laws are the things that might be kind of making HRs working together complicated. So it does, seem like all of higher education is at a breaking point in many different kinds of ways. So what are new things we can do, like the Arrupe College model, to think through what is it that students need, who do we want to be educating, and then how do we kind of think creatively to marshal this amazing common good that we do have, which is a quality education.
Thank you, Laura. Jenny, do you want to weigh in there?
No, I think that was really well said.
Well, Jenny Schmidt came right in here and said, I love this idea, and I wonder if schools like the 10 biggest Catholic schools, I have some questions piling in now, 10 biggest Catholic schools could share their wealth and invest in their Catholic mission. How's that going to go over? Jenny, you're laughing. What do you think?
Well,
hey, Father Knightsky, this is a good place for you.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea that merits consideration.
I like to unmute Father Knightsky. Megan, can you? And sorry, we've emailed Father Knightsky, but here we go. How about trial by fire?
Well, that'll be the day. But I mean, I listened to our conversation today. I mean, one of the things, actually, we had an Arrupe board meeting this afternoon, and one of the things I've been doing, I've only been dean for 7 months, and one of the things I've been doing is trying to pressure the the Midwestern Jesuit universities to say you would take a couple of Arrupe students, full scholarship, full housing and meal plans. And because we know that 50% of first generation college students will not complete their first year without housing. And when I meet with these college presidents, they're like, wow, you know, this is really expensive. And I'm asking for 2 students. And like, that's really expensive. And housing is real money. And, you know, and I use as much Catholic guilt as possible. And I think I got a number of them, but it shouldn't be that difficult to say, you're going to take 2 Arrupe students a year. And so we're working at it. We're pushing for it, but collectively we should be able to do a better job. You know?
I agree, and thanks for responding on the spot, Father Matsky.
Do I get a stipend for this?
Yeah, we'll give you $12.75. I don't know, anybody, how about Laura or Jenny, responses to that?
I mean, I think that's really important. That's a really important thing. I mean, if you had a network of Arrupe colleges across the country and they were able to exchange students, such that, you know, 2 years, you'd spend 2 years at Santa Clara and then you're 2 years at Loyola University, Chicago. That is what an amazing experience for a student. And I think it just, in terms of social mobility, I think that, you know, and the Catholic advantage, that would be real value added.
Yeah, agreed. And, you know, I think a lot of our colleges, we've imagined them, and at least that's true as Santa Clara, as a 4-year, this kind of 4-year experience. And so, you know, I mean, maybe there's a way that we can hold on to that, but then also we make sure that we have room for transfer students. We have a good quality experience for our 2-year students as well. And I know a lot of our schools, you know, I feel kind of badly because I'm kind of glossing over. Our schools are so different and unique. And I have the data for all of our schools. And I'm trying to think about how to kind of look through all that information and, you know, think about how can we think creatively in these different kinds of ways and work together, because of course the economic model has been set up for us not to work together, to be individual institutions that are competing for students, that are competing with one another, and everyone's working so hard, even at our expensive colleges, I know, to keep, you know, things financially moving forward. So yeah, I think it is going to require that we're thinking in different ways, maybe about how we envision our own institutions, as well as, you know, what we mean to one another as well, and the students that we want to serve.
Yeah, that's a basic theology, a basic Christian humanism that the Jesuit Ignatian tradition is so comfortable dwelling in. You know, your work is really going, I mean, your work's very helpful here, and these books you're writing and the work, you know, the work right now you're doing is wonderful. It's a long line though. We think about Fe Alegría out of Peru and South America. That's a rich legacy, and then picked up by the Cristo Rey schools and picked up by Father Foley and the why am I forgetting the Cristo Rey and Nativity, Nativity schools and Cristo Rey schools. So that's the important work. There's a question about Jesuit business schools in here too, and there's actually a document going around AJCU from 2019 that's challenging deans and schools of business to, you know, while we accept the validity of the market economy, that we could do more economic activity that sustains the common good, you know, especially meeting the needs of the poor and excluded, and thinking about the universal destination of goods, you know, and thinking about triple bottom line things, environmental sustainability. These are taking some traction in Jesuit business schools, and I have an eye on that. I'm glad to read a comment from a former student at Loyola who now is a admissions professional, Amy Christensen. Good to see you on here, Amy. And so she knows what's going on, and she writes the federal state government needs to offer more aid to students, exclamation point, and fund more support services at schools, smiley face. And good to see you, Dr. Murphy. And I say, good to see you, Amy, one of the greatest students of all time. That's great. Then a colleague, Allison Locke here at Loyola, here's a different direction. What do you think about this? Is there any movement in Catholic universities to offer more trade school type degrees? Or an Arrupe type model that would offer trade school degrees? These are fields that are dying. Just knowing that there are students out there who this would be really good for, and we always need good plumbers, you know. I think that's interesting. I think that's interesting. Any thoughts on any of this?
How are we going to crowdsource all these good ideas?
I don't know.
Take them up.
There's so much energy, you know, and it's Pope Francis too, running a theology of attraction in my book, where he's out there in the margins, in the frontera, because that's where Jesus is. And you know, and there's just this kind of invitation. I guess maybe, Laura, it's networking. This is what you're trying to do, is, I mean, how do we network? I guess, you know, the smaller colleges that are kind of dying, they don't need to die. They can confederate, right? The bigger ones can maybe you know, take the solidarity route and support. But these are organizational layers that are also need to be developed. I feel like I'm talking too much, so please, someone else come on in. Any thought, Laura or Jenny?
Go,
I mean, I
Jenny.
think it's important. I guess what I would say in terms of at Arrupe College here, we're very, you know, sort of, we don't want to have mission creep in terms of what we do. And I mean, I think the idea of promoting trades and trades education is really, really very important, and it needs to be done. I'm not sure if, you know, we would be branching off and doing that. I'm not in terms of our economy of scale, but I think it is really important. And I think community colleges are essential too, you know, in terms of the landscape of higher ed, and that they have a very important role to play. And it's, you know, it's not sort of one institution has to do everything, but that you know, that's an important area for development in higher ed.
All right, you know, maybe a couple more. And Laura, do you have anything to say on that one?
No.
No, okay. Patricia Murphy, a distant cousin, more than likely. Here's one maybe Father Knightsky was beginning to address. Would Catholic colleges and universities dedicate a percentage of their endowment to support first generation students? Does this happen anywhere?
I'm assuming that it does. I mean, the financial aid structures, of course, at all of our schools is pretty complex. So I'm assuming that it does happen. I don't know if they're named, you know, for first generation students.
Yeah.
Father Nitsky, I think, is.
Yeah, there's very few.
Very few. That makes sense. Well, you know, this seems like a watershed or a threshold moment. And you've given us really so much to think about, Dr. Laura Nichols. And your response, Dr. Jennifer Boyle, only added texture and dimension to the issue. So my guess is we're going to see a lot more on this. I want to thank you too, Father Knightsky, for participating. And I want to wish everybody the best of luck in their work. It's clear to me the Catholic education has something beautiful and sustaining and life-giving. It's a very important part of this country's history, and I like to think its best days are in front of us. But it might take some reimagining, right? It's not going to be the golden age of the 50s and 60s, but that doesn't mean it can't be anything truly and profoundly effective and, you know, useful, but rare and unique, life-giving in the tradition of the mission. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and check us out online. And I wish you a very good night, and God bless us all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hake Center.
Thank you, Laura.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. We'll see you soon.